The house is quiet. The kitchen light's still on. Your tea has gone cold. And you realize the day ended. Again. You did everything right. You built a career. You healed your wounds. You learned how to stand alone. Friends say you're strong. That any man would be lucky. That it will happen someday. But the night doesn't believe those phrases. Because when the clock passes midnight, something inside you asks, softly, almost with shame, did I wait too long? You're not desperate. But you're not at peace either. There's a specific kind of emptiness. A silence that only appears after 40. And here's the truth no one says. Maybe the problem isn't that you're single. Maybe the problem is what that loneliness makes you believe about yourself. So let me ask you something. With complete honesty. No cliches. No empty advice. What if this season of your life isn't a delay, but a redirection you still don't understand? There is a quiet reason behind this pain. And it didn't start at 40. It started much earlier. In a place you rarely visit. An old memory. A small moment. But one that changed everything. Without you noticing. Maybe it was an ordinary day. An argument at home. A heavy silence at the table. An emotionally distant adult. And you there. Too young to understand. But old enough to feel. That you had to handle things alone. While other girls were learning to receive care. You were learning not to bother anyone. Not to ask for too much. Not to need anyone. You watched everything. You learned quickly. You swallowed emotions. And called it maturity. The mind keeps these lessons. Turns survival into identity. It builds a version of you. Strong. Controlled. Competent. Self-sufficient. Almost unbreakable. And for many years it worked. You built a career. Made hard decisions. Overcame disappointment. Solved problems alone. People admired you for it. Respected you for it. Sometimes even envied you. But the human psyche has its ironies. What protects also separates. What strengthens also hardens. What saves also isolates. And that is exactly what Carl Jung noticed. He called this the persona. A mask created for survival. The persona helps you function in the world. It organizes your strength. Protects your vulnerabilities. Prevents you from breaking again. But it also creates distance. It hides parts of your soul. Parts that want to be seen. Parts that want to be loved. And here a quiet paradox appears. The stronger you seem, the less people perceive your need for affection. The more independent you look, the more others assume you need no one. So some men step back. Others feel intimidated. And emotionally unavailable men feel completely comfortable. Because unavailable men don't need to cross your armor. They stay on the surface. In light conversations. In temporary interest. In promises that never mature. And you feel something strange. An uncomfortable familiarity. As if you already knew this absence. Then the nights arrive. And with them the silent question. Never spoken out loud. But impossible to ignore. Did my strength become a W? Did surviving so well teach me to hide the part that needs love? Something strange begins to happen after 40. You start looking back. Not to relive the past. But to understand it. Some stories end too quickly. Others never truly begin. And some seem promising. Until they disappear without explanation. At first you think it was bad luck. Maybe the wrong person. Maybe the wrong timing. Maybe just another common disappointment. But after a few years, a pattern begins to appear. Different faces. But the same feeling at the end. Men who seem interested. But never fully available. Men who admire you. But never commit. Men who come close. But keep an invisible distance. And you feel it. Even when you try to ignore it. The most confusing part is this. You don't consciously choose these people. They simply appear. Chemistry happens. The conversation flows. There is attraction. There's hope. And for a moment, you believe. But the unconscious has its own routes. Searches for what feels familiar. Even when the familiar hurts. Even when it hurt us before. It recognizes old patterns. Old sensations. Old dynamics. And calls it connection. That is why some relationships feel intense at the beginning. Something accelerates inside you. As if that person understands your soul. As if someone finally arrived. But intensity is not intimacy. Urgency is not depth. And chemistry is not destiny. Sometimes it is just emotional recognition. Then the cycle begins. You show up with maturity. With presence. with honesty. You try to build something real. But on the other side, there is hesitation. There is distance. And the more you try to understand, the more confusing the relationship becomes. Messages slow down. Plans never solidify. Promises stay vague. And you begin to doubt yourself. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I'm too demanding. Maybe the problem is me. But here is the difficult truth. This pattern didn't start in your relationships. It started long before them. It began the moment your mind learned that love and effort belong together. That closeness must be earned. That staying requires proving your worth. So you enter relationships prepared to give, to sustain, to understand, to be patient, to not pressure, to not ask for too much, to not scare them away, to not lose them. And without noticing, you repeat the same emotional dynamic. Not because you are weak, but because your mind learned this way, because your story taught it this way, because your heart adapted this way. And old patterns rarely disappear on their own. If these words touch something you've never been able to explain, this channel might be the place where your story finally starts to make sense. Here we talk about silent loneliness, confusing relationships, and the search for love that doesn't require you to betray yourself. If you want emotional clarity, discernment, and peace during the hardest nights, click the button now and subscribe. This space was created for strong women who are tired of carrying everything alone. Maybe this is the conversation your heart has been waiting for. There is a kind of exhaustion few people see. It isn't physical. It isn't visible. It's a quiet emotional fatigue. The kind that appears after years of trying to love with maturity. After years of believing the next story could be different. After years of holding hope carefully. Like protecting something fragile. Because you didn't enter these relationships out of naivety. You entered with awareness. With experience. With emotional maturity. You didn't want games. You wanted truth. Real presence. Something that could actually be built. But when the pattern repeats, something begins to shift inside you. A small doubt appears. Then another. And another. Until one question starts growing. Quiet. But heavy. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I should be more flexible. Maybe relationships are just like this. Maybe no one is truly available. Maybe the problem is my expectations. Maybe I should adapt more. Maybe I should ask for less. Maybe I should feel less. And this is where the emotional trap begins. Not when someone leaves, but when you start shrinking yourself. When you begin editing your needs. When you soften your truth. When you start accepting less than you truly want. Just to avoid losing someone who hasn't even decided to stay. So you try loving with more patience. You try to understand more. You try to pressure less. You try to be lighter, easier, calmer, more understanding, more convenient. But there is something no one tells you. Loving more doesn't fix emotional unavailability. Being patient doesn't create commitment. Being understanding doesn't turn absence into presence. And adapting too much sometimes only teaches the other person that you will stay, even when your needs are not met. So something slowly begins to happen. You remain strong on the outside, functional, independent. Inside, something starts emptying, not love, but energy. And in the quietest nights, when the phone is silent, when the house is still, when the world feels far away, a strange feeling appears. Not just loneliness, something deeper, a sense of not belonging, as if everyone else found their place. And you are always between stories, always between beginnings and endings, always waiting for something that never matures. And in that moment loneliness stops being temporary, begins to feel like identity, as if this is simply your story, as if this is your destiny. But there is a truth almost no one sees. This is not the final trap. There is another one beneath it, quieter, more dangerous. Begins the MO. Meant you consider giving up on love. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. There is a quiet moment when something shifts inside you. Not an emotional explosion. Not a dramatic decision. Just a moment of clarity. When you realize repeating the same pattern will not create a different ending. And that the change you expected from others may need to start within you. The first step is simple to understand, but difficult to practice. Learning to observe before you invest. Not the chemistry. Not the intensity. Not the excitement of the beginning. But emotional consistency. Real presence. Emotionally available people show this early. They do not create confusion. They do not disappear emotionally. They do not keep you in constant doubt. They show up. They maintain presence. They keep alignment between words and actions. And that changes everything. For a long time you may have been taught to focus on people's potential, on what they could become, on who they might be someday. But healthy relationships are not built on future promises. They are built on present behavior, on reality. So the first act of healing is this. Stop interpreting mixed signals. Stop justifying absence. Stop explaining confusing behavior. When someone is emotionally present, it does not need to be decoded. It is visible. It is calm. The second step is deeper. Learning to tolerate emotional calm. Because your emotional system may have adapted to intensity, to urgency, to unpredictability, to emotional highs and lows, and called that connection. But stability can feel strange at first. Too quiet, too simple, too predictable. Without the emotional roller coaster. Without constant anxiety. Without that sense of risk. Without the fear of losing. And that is exactly where healing begins. When you recognize that emotional peace is not boredom. That consistency is not lack of passion. That calm does not mean lack of love. In fact, very often, it means maturity. Then something new begins to grow inside you. A different way of loving. Without chasing. Without proving worth. Without convincing anyone to stay. Without fighting to be chosen. Without negotiating your dignity. Without abandoning yourself. And in this new emotional place, you start noticing something unexpected. Maybe the question was never, why am I alone? Maybe the real question is, how many times did I abandon myself just to avoid being alone? And that question changes everything. Because when you stop abandoning yourself, something quiet happens inside the soul. A kind of return. A reconnection with your own presence. And when that happens, loneliness stops being despair. It becomes space. Space for something real to finally arrive. Hey, if you got distracted for a moment, come back here with me now. Because what comes next is the most important part of this entire conversation. And it may be the first time someone explains your loneliness in a different way. There comes a point in life when logic stops answering everything. You analyzed patterns. You understood the psychology. You recognized the emotional dynamics. But one silent question remains. Why did some stories never happen? Why did some people never stay? Why did certain paths simply close? At that point many people begin to believe they lost their time, that they arrived too late, that maybe love already passed by, that destiny has already been decided. And now the only option is acceptance. Learning to live with it. Moving forward quietly. But faith offers a perspective logic cannot reach. Not everything that ended was a loss. Not everything that didn't happen was failure. Not every closed door was rejection. Some were silent redirections. Invisible protections. Deliverances you would only understand later. Much later. There is an ancient passage that speaks directly to this moment. A promise written for emotional deserts. For seasons when life feels still. When nothing new seems to appear. When paths feel dry. When the future feels empty. And the heart begins to doubt. In Isaiah 43 verse 19 there is a line that crossed centuries. See, I am doing a new thing. How it springs up. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness. And streams in the wasteland. This is not a promise of ease. It is a promise of renewal. Maybe your love story isn't over. Maybe it simply didn't follow the script you expected. Maybe God wasn't delaying your life. Maybe He was protecting your heart. Maybe He was removing stories that looked like love, but would end in exhaustion, in confusion, in losing yourself. Because there is something few people realize. Loneliness is not always absence. Sometimes it is preparation. Sometimes it is space. Sometimes it is necessary silence. So you can hear your own soul again. So you can rebuild your identity. Without needing to be chosen. And when that reconstruction happens, something shifts deeply. You no longer enter relationships to fill emptiness. You enter with presence. With awareness. With emotional freedom. With discernment. And that changes the kind of love you attract. Because emotionally healthy people are not looking for someone to save them. They are looking for someone who has found themselves. Someone who doesn't need to prove worth. Someone who knows who they are. Someone who doesn't negotiate dignity. Someone who doesn't confuse intensity with love. Someone who walks in peace. So maybe the real question was never, why am I alone? Maybe the deeper question is, who did I need to become before living the love I truly deserve? And sometimes, that transformation takes time. More time than we expect. But if this promise is true, then the desert is not the end of the story. It is simply the place where new paths begin. Paths you could not walk before. Love you would not recognize before. And encounters that only happen when the soul finally learns to walk in peace. Maybe now you begin to notice something different. Your story was not a mistake. Your loneliness was not punishment. And the time that passed was not wasted. It was a silent process. A process of maturity. A process of emotional awakening. Even when it felt like emptiness. For many years you believed happiness would start when someone arrived. When the right person appeared. When you were finally chosen. But emotional maturity reveals something deeper. Healthy love does not begin when someone arrives. It begins when you stop abandoning yourself. When you return to yourself. And when that happens, loneliness changes meaning. It stops being rejection. Stops being delay. Stops being proof that something is wrong. It becomes space. Space for awareness. Space for truth. Because now you no longer need to chase. You don't need to prove your worth. You don't need to convince anyone to stay. You don't need to dim your light to fit someone. You don't need to negotiate your dignity. You don't need to accept less than your heart desires. You don't need to adapt to confusing love. You don't need to lose yourself anymore. And when a woman reaches this point, something powerful happens. She stops looking for someone to complete her. She begins recognizing who walks beside her, who respects her silence, who values her presence, who isn't afraid of her depth, who has also found themselves. Because mature relationships are not built out of need. They are built out of meeting. Two whole paths. Two conscious stories. Two people who don't need saving, but choose to walk together. With truth. Maybe the love you imagined at 20 is not the love your soul needs now. Maybe it is calmer, more aware, deeper, less about intensity, more about peace, less about promises, more about presence. And if that love has not arrived yet, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It only means your story is still being written. And real stories do not always follow the world's timing. They follow the rhythm of transformation, of the soul maturing. Because in the end, the biggest change does not happen in the world. It happens inside you. When you realize you no longer need to beg for love. You no longer need to explain yourself. You no longer chase presence. Because those who are ready, stay. And then something surprising happens. The anxiety softens. The silence becomes lighter. The nights grow calmer. And your heart finally rests. Not because every answer arrived, but because you realized something essential. You were never late. Maybe you were simply being prepared. Prepared to love with awareness. Prepared to recognize what is real. Prepared to refuse illusions. Prepared not to lose yourself again. Prepared to live something true. Something that honors who you became. And when you understand this, loneliness stops being an enemy. It becomes a passage. Passage between who you were and who you are becoming now. Maybe the next chapter of your life is only just beginning. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to our channel right now. Here we talk about the silent struggles almost no one explains. Loneliness, love, faith, and emotional maturity after 40. This space was created for women who built strong lives but still want peace in their hearts. If you want more clarity, deeper awareness, and relationships that honor who you've become, this channel is for you. Maybe this is the conversation your soul has been waiting for. And if you made it to the end of this video, write in the comments, "I choose the peace of my soul." This small act is more powerful than it seems. Many people say that when they declare this, something begins to shift inside them. Clarity appears, the heart calms, and new paths start opening. May this message mark the beginning of a new chapter in your story.